Hello and welcome to Alpha Anywhere's Q&A webinar. I'm Scott Allen. I'd like to welcome you all back. Today we have a special guest, Steve Wood of IADN, an expert in Alpha Anywhere and trainer who runs through IADN a long-running series of webinars as well. He's come to share his expertise with us. Steve, are you there?
I am, in fact.
Great. Well, Steve, I'm going to make you the presenter. Here we go. All right. So you should have control and be able to show your screens as you wish.
Okay, I have two screens. So which screen do you see? Do you see the one that has a shaking web page in the middle of it?
I see your desktop that you just dragged a web page onto.
Excellent. Okay, very good. So I'm used to being the host and not being the presenter. It's been a while since I've presented. And as Scott said, over at IADN.com, we've done 700 and something webinars in a row on Fridays. And many of you here, I don't see your names, but I'm sure that we know each other from that resource. So we're going to talk about two-factor authentication today. I have a client that needed to have this, and they had some special requirements, which makes it a little bit interesting in deployment. So it's not just two-factor authentication out of the box of Alpha, it's with some tweaks and some control that the client had to have. Let me share with you the various screens that I will be showing today so we can keep track of what I have, because I have quite a few screens to show. One is the basic screen for login that I'll use, and this is the screen that will show or not show two-factor authentication request, depending on how I configure the system. I have my email waiting for the two-factor authentication authorization code to come through when they request login. In addition to that, I of course have Alpha Anywhere loaded and ready to go to show some of the components that were built from templates within Alpha and then modified to do what I need to do. I have, if necessary, I have a database view to show the tables that I've used to control two-factor authentication within Alpha. There are some requirements that Alpha has for two-factor authentication that are required, and then there's some things that I added to that, again, for my micromanagement of two-factor authentication. In addition to that, I have I'm already logged into my site here, and I'm on the system configuration screen so that I can toggle multi-factor authentication on or off to show you that feature. So this is the same website that I showed you earlier where I'll be logging in, but I'm already logged in here using a different browser so I can show that feature. I'm logged in as an administrator, so I have access to the administration features. And on that screen are two things. One is system configuration, so system-wide settings. And the other one is a user list configuration, so it's by user, and I only have one or two users in here. I'll be using the admin as my login, so I'll be controlling two-factor authentication at the user level with this screen here. Let me show the last screen that I have, and let's start talking about what it is I'll be showing. Okay, the client wanted, I'm reading from my list here, the client wanted to have two-factor authentication. One of their primary objectives is kind of interesting. They wanted to force their users to not share user IDs, login IDs, and they wanted them to use an email address that was legitimate and that actually came to them. So if you think about it, so here's a client that has, or my customer has big clients, larger institutions, and they tend to share their email address because it's just used as a login. It's not necessary that they receive any email back at that login ID. But this company has a requirement that individuals use a email address for login that belongs to them, and it wasn't happening. So now they're going to force that using two-factor authentication, because the other thing that they did is they said the only authorization method that we will allow is by email. You know, by two-factor authentication allows email address, SMS, text message, and also like Google Authenticator. In their case, they wanted to force it to be email address, and they wanted to force it to be the email address that they use as their login. So that makes it different than the standard deployment of two-factor authentication, where you're allowed to modify how you receive your authentication code. So some of the features is that actually these aren't things that they necessarily asked for, but I included them because it made sense. So the administrator is able to turn two-factor authentication on or off at a system level. So in fact, I've already done all the work to program this for the client. It's up there and installed and ready to go, but it's turned off at the moment. So after they go through the process of announcing it to their clients, telling them it's coming, in 15 days or whatever, telling them it's coming in 5 days, and getting them prepared for it and telling them the requirements, once they're ready to go live, they'll toggle it on and it'll be on system-wide. They also wanted to be able to toggle two-factor authentication on for individual users. And this is for an interesting reason. Two-factor authentication is actually a bit of a pain in the ass. And so people like me who log into the site 20 times a day and them who log in to do their analysis and go to the admin screen, we don't want to use two-factor authentication. We want to just log in. So the ability to toggle it on or off by user is a nice feature to allow me to avoid having to do that extra step when I log in. And as I mentioned, the users are being forced to use two-factor authentication. They will go through a process where they see a screen where it says you must use two-factor authentication. You can accept that or you can decline that. If they accept it, it goes through the process of configuring it for them. If they decline it, it sends them to a screen saying, well, I'm sorry, you can't log in. Here's a phone number to call if you have any questions. And so they have to go, call the support desk and say, why am I being forced to do this, etc. And let's see. And then I mentioned the only authorization method is email address. So the rest of what I've listed here is actually the how-to to build all this. So if I can send this to people at the end of this, or you can just do a screenshot, but this is more or less the how-to in terms of the what you have to have for a database, what has to happen in Alpha Anywhere's project properties, what has to happen in the Alpha login component and some other components. And then I have a few Alpha A5W pages, and then I have various functions that are being used to make this run. Some work in progress that I have not done yet is to have the two-factor authentication be assigned by groups, so they can assign it like to one company of 100 users and then wait, and then another group at a later date. They're thinking that this might be a hassle, might make lots of support calls, so they wanted to introduce it maybe in steps. And then the ability, once someone's configured with two-factor authentication, to only mandate it to happen, like let's say once per week. So once you've logged in and done your authentication, maybe it's not required for another week, and then it's required again. Those are things. So I'm going to now start showing how it works. I assume, Scott, if there's questions, I'll see them on the chat, or you'll tell me.
Yeah, they will show up in the chat, and I will take that moment to invite any of you in the audience to ask your questions here in the GoTo control panel, and I'll siphon through those and feed them to you as it's appropriate.
Okay, as the host, I'm used to seeing all the names, so I
Oh
don't
yeah,
see.
they should be, if you have that GoTo panel, and there should be attendees that can be expanded.
Not for the attendees, just you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so let's go through this. Let me show you where we're starting off. Let me close these windows. So here again is the management screen to manage two-factor authentication, in the system. So I currently have it set with configuration. I have it configured off. Use MFA, which is multi-factor authentication, off. It's toggled off. And under website user list, I'm going to use the admin as my login. It doesn't matter what's here because it's toggled off system-wide, but I have it, MFA is not active for this person. And the exclude button, which I'll explain later, is also checked off, so I'm not being excluded. So that's the condition that I'm at. I'll bring over my login screen and I'll just log in. And it does what you would expect it to do. It logs in, right? So that's the without MFA configured. I'll log back out and I'll go to system configuration. I'll turn multi-factor authentication on. Now remember I said that in a condition where here's the user, multi-factor authentication is now turned on. This person is not active and they're not excluded, I'll tell you what excluded means. Excluded means they never get two-factor authentication requirements. They're excluded, and that's my feature to allow me to not have to use it. So now I've toggled it on system-wide. The user I'm using is not currently configured for two-factor authentication. So now I'll log in again. And it asks, or it tells me I have to accept two-factor authentication. This screen's not enhanced perfectly yet. It's going to say, and here's a phone number to call in case you disagree with this, and here's more explanation of what's going to happen. You have to use your email address that you have ownership of, and those things will be added to this later on. If they decline, it says, sorry, you can't log in, try again later, or something to that effect. Come back here, I'll log in again. This time I would say, I understand, and I accept. So it logs them back out and says, thank you, now log back in. And so now when we log back in, it magically asks for authentication code. And they will have been informed where to get this code from. And I guess I should say here, Joe, check your email address. So come to the email, it's already there. So here's the authentication code that got delivered. It just says, this is configurable within alpha, but I just say your authorization code, and this is configured in alpha right here. And I left it as, as stock as it comes. And then this is the code. I'll Control-C, copy that into my place. And now for fun here, I'm going to make it an incorrect value. And it says the code's not valid, of course. So that's your, make sure it works. I'll put the correct code in, submit code, and it logs in. That's the end of the best part of the presentation, really. So let's log back out. And from now on, it will ask me for two-factor authentication. I'm going to refresh my screen here to show you what the user list looks like now. Let's refresh. Website admin, general admin, user list. So now, remember it was unchecked, now it's checked. So it automatically checked off that box saying two-factor authentication is active for this person, admin. I could, as an administrator, come here and toggle it back off again if I wanted that person to not have it. In this case, they'd go through the same process because I did not say exclude me. I just said I'm no longer configured, and it'll ask me again to configure two-factor authentication, or to accept it, I mean. If I say exclude, and I don't need to demo this because it's obvious what happens, it just simply doesn't ask me for two-factor authentication ever. And I'm excluded, permanently. So let me put this back the way it was, right? So, yes, at this point, I think it's about it for how it works. Yep, not much else.
We don't have any questions at this point, but definitely interested to hear them.
Yeah, why don't we pause and ask if there are any questions, or if this is what people expect from two-factor authentication. I'm going to demo how it works, but are there any questions about this in general so far?
So far, so clear.
Yeah, I mean, asking for questions never works anyway. It's always towards the end. I know that from all my time doing webinars. So, okay, so let's see next.
We
Okay.
get some appreciation. Oh, we got some coming in.
There you go.
One question was, we got a few people saying it looks very nice, well done. But we also got a question of where is the SMS setup?
Yeah.
Show us how to put it together, please. Yeah. Right.
So there you go. Now when there's questions, then I say, well, I'm about to show that. So let's do that part now.
Great.
I mentioned before I have a database, so I'm keeping track of all this. In my database, I have two tables that are important. One is I call WT setup. WT stands for web template. It comes from a long time ago. And setup is my defaults page. So in my defaults page, I have an MFA is active. MFA is multi-factor authentication. And it's either 1 or 0, yes or no. And so that's being controlled back where you saw on this screen by system settings right here. That field is controlled by that. In addition, I have to the setup screen, I have web users, which is my, it's called also now in alpha, the extended user table. The user table where I have the name and address and those things for the user. I have an MFA as active for that user. That gets a 1 or a 0. And I have MFA excluded for that user. And again, that correlates back to these toggles here, right? Okay, so now go back to my list and look at the database. So we're asking how is this put together, but I'll skip down to project properties since that was the question. Where is SMTP configured? Where is my web extended user table configured? And where do I set up two-factor authentication in the project properties? So that comes next. So in alpha, here we go, web projects, project properties, and I always have a hard time finding this, but if I come down, one of the requirements is to make the A table the extended user information table, and this is one of the places you can configure it. Here's the name of the table. Here's the ID, that's the primary key between my table, web users, and Alpha security table, which is web security _ users. And then this is my connection string. Here we go. So two-factor authentication is configured in project properties. I happen to have in here my configuration for SMS and Google Authenticator, but in this particular case, for this particular client, I'm only using the email settings. So we have send from alias, the subject, your authorization code, message, enter the code in the space provided to continue the login process. The code is valid for 2 hours. So that's all built into Alpha. I don't configure it to be valid for 2 hours. That's something within Alpha's function. I'm not even sure if I can change that, unless the token life is that value. I'm not sure if it is. So that's for that. And then one more thing to configure. The SMTP settings. So I have in project properties, I have my SMTP server and my port. If I expanded this, you would see the username and those things required for SMTP. So that's the 3 things you have to have configured in project properties to make this work. Extended user information table, SMTP information for sending the email, and then two-factor authentication setup. In my case, only the email is being is necessary. Any questions about that part? I guess I can't hear the questions. Okay, back to my list. The database, I kind of already showed that to you. We have in my setup table, which is like defaults, I have MFA is active, yes or no. In my web users table, which is my extended user information table, which has name and address and so on, I have MFA is active, yes or no. I have MFA exclude, yes or no, in the same table, so by user. And then one last field I didn't mention that is a requirement by Alpha is this long name called other option JSON. And this is a required field. I think it's a varchar that Alpha requires, where it puts the configuration for two-factor authentication. And why don't we go show that real quick just to see how that looks. So the database, web users table, here's the way it looks. If you can see down here, I can't expand it any more than it is, but it's a JSON string. And in there, amongst the things that it says is two-factor authentication requirement is true, so it's turned on. The method I've chosen is email, and then here is the email address. And I think that's all that's important is that in there, and the rest of it's not necessary, but it's things that Alpha puts in here that I don't do this part. That's where Alpha configures in my users table two-factor authentication. Let's see here. Let's database. Let's go look at the login component, which is kind of where everything kind of takes place. So in Alpha's login component, and just for fun, I'll go back and show my nice pretty screen and just mention for fun that as I refresh the screen, the background changes. The client wanted that too. They're completely irrelevant backgrounds, and I'm not sure how their clients are going to like or not like that, and if it sends a message, but the backgrounds change every time you refresh the screen. Anyway, so the login component in Alpha. Here's Alpha, here's the login. First thing you should know is that to build this, you can do it from a template with an Alpha. And the template gives you everything you need to pre-configure two-factor authentication. The various things that need to be done are already in the template. I modified mine a bit for look and feel to make it look different than Alpha's, and I modified it for where the two-factor authentication request comes up within the screen. And I also have a header and a footer and those kinds of things that are my additions to it. But other than that, this is basically what Alpha gives you out of the box. So the important things here are two sections. One, again, this is in the template, a container called two-factor authentication stage 1. And that's just the login, email address, and password. Then there is a section that's in the template called two-factor authentication stage 2. And stage 2 is where it asks for the authentication code. And then, so the request for the authentication code is hidden. If you look at there, it says display none. That's how it's, it's display none, so it doesn't show up originally. And it only shows up, and this is actually within the Alpha's function that I don't actually see, but how it makes it show up is within Alpha's built-in function that I think I have access to, but I don't know where it is. The other important piece here is that, where's the login? So the login button, if I come to the click function, it's login, and you see it has a 1 inside of it. This is important because typically when you log in, the login is just simply login, parentheses. If it's two-factor authentication, it's going to have a login 1, which is stage 1. And that tells Alpha, we're going to be doing two-factor authentication. This is stage 1, and do the part of the process that you have to do to enact two-factor authentication. And again, that comes in the template. I didn't do that piece. The submit code down at the bottom, which is the second option the person has. Once they enter their authorization code, they will click the submit code button, and under that for login, it has login stage 2, which is for some reason not login parentheses 2, but login stage 2 parentheses. But that's, again, that's in the template as well. Under properties down here, I might hope I can find this. Way too many properties. Obviously, an important feature is it has integrated login functionality is checked. And here's the various things that get configured for that. Now, the thing that I have here that does not come automatically in the template is a two-factor login event. And this happens between the time the person enters their username and password and clicks login, and prior to the moment that the two-factor authentication request for the code appears or doesn't appear. So this controls whether it appears or doesn't appear based on anything I want to do. So under the functions we have, again, that's the function before two-factor, and I'm not going to go through all this because for two reasons. One, I'll lose you, and number two, I don't remember it all at this point perfectly. But what it does, it goes to 2 levels of whether I do or do not want to apply authentication to this instance. The first level, of course, is system-wide. If it's turned off system-wide, I'm not going to show it any two-factor authentication. If it's on system-wide, I'm going to look at the user to see if it's on for that person, or if it's excluded for that person. If it's excluded, again, I'm going to skip two-factor authentication and just log them in right away. If it's on system-wide, that person is not excluded, and they're also not configured for two-factor authentication, I'm going to, okay, so I left something out here. There's two parts to this. This part controls whether it shows two-factor authentication or not. However, there's another function I'll show in a moment called on login that happens when they log in. That one kind of works in conjunction with this one. And so it says if it's on system-wide, this person is not excluded and not configured yet, show the requirement screen saying you must accept two-factor authentication. And once they accept that, it configures it, logs them out, and then when they come back through this the second time, they are configured for two-factor authentication, and now it gets to this part where it says, are they configured for it? Yes, okay. Bring up that second part of the screen that asks for the code. Also emails the code out. So those two things have to happen. So this is the piece called before two-factor authentication, and then I mentioned one other one called on login. So again, if login succeeded, I asked the question again. I don't want to be redundant, but is it on system-wide? Is it on for the user? And control what happens based upon those facts, right? So there you go. That's the login component. There's nothing else to it but that, and most of it comes in the alpha template. I just tweaked it for my own, pleasure. Are there any questions on this piece right here, the login component?
Well, we've got some questions, and I could go through a few of these. There's been a number of things that came up. First off, thank you. This presentation is great so far, and you're getting a lot of appreciation from the audience. One thing about that token that came up, that was in fact, the amount of time, and it's currently set default at 7,200 seconds, right? So that's how it's broken down.
Okay.
Which does equate to 2 hours, which I would say is perhaps maybe not the safest number. I think you'll find industry standard very common to be only 5 or 10 minutes even.
Right.
And the risk is that the longer it's out there, the more chance someone who might know when you are going to potentially try to do this might try to intercept. So shorter is better. But you did have a couple questions. I'm going to say one of these for later. But have you configured this to send an email when the user changes their password? Or is this already built in by Alpha, was one of the questions.
Well, that's a good question. So there's a place where they reset their, well, no, there's no way for them to reset their email address. That would have to go through the management of the company to do that. And it's probably a good question, though. I should have a feature to change that, and I don't. So if they were allowed to change their user ID, which they're not currently, I would have to then update the two-factor authentication, or probably what I would do is wipe it out, so that when they logged in again with the new ID, it would go through the same process. That's what I would do.
Even with the same ID but different password? I mean, can you change the
password? I'm sorry. Password's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Yeah, password's completely separate. They can change the password all they want. It doesn't affect two-factor authentication.
Excellent.
Sorry.
No problem.
So one of these days, if you want to see some interesting password options, the way this password works in this system, it's not based on complexity. It looks up at it goes using an API to determine if the password is good or bad based upon a variety of factors at that API. One of which is this password, has this password been compromised? Is it part of the worldwide hacking list of passwords that are routinely being used to try to brute force break in? So It doesn't allow you to have repeating characters, doesn't allow you to use the word password, doesn't allow you to use things that are obvious and whole names and words and those things, but it's based on an API. Anyway,
All right.
so other
Uh,
questions?
yeah, I got another one here. If your login is a username and not an email address, can MFA use the extended user info table to get the email address?
Sure, yeah, that would be something you would do in the configuration within your XBasic. Yeah, this client uses email address, but yes, certainly could do that.
Okay.
I could work it out if I had some time. That would be easy to do.
Okay. One last one here. What does limit one mean in the SQL?
That was looking up to my system table. Where'd it go? It wasn't there. Where was it? I don't even know where it's at. It's probably the reside on login. Right. So limit one, in a way, doesn't make sense for this because there's only one record, but it really is not that useful. So limit one means only bring back one record. If I'm looking up to a configuration screen, I expect there to be one record only. And in my case, there is only one record. So it's kind of not necessary to have the word limit one there because it's not going to find two records. In a multi-tenant configuration, I might have multiple configurations, and then I would look it up by some kind of tenant ID in here. But limit one, in this is not necessary. But this is MySQL version. If you're used to using SQL Server, it's different. It's a different syntax.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
I'll go back to where I was left off here. So we did the login component pretty well. So the other components that are here, they are not necessary, but I put them in because these are things I wanted to do to control it. There is a MFA Accept component. Let's take a quick look at that. MFA Accept, and I think I can do a working preview. Let's see if it works. Okay, this is the one that says, you have to accept it. And so there in the, when they make the choice and click submit, and it processes it just using a function, XBasic. Okay, here's set MFA. Again, so here's the part that's important. And this is, you might not necessarily be able to find this. You have to kind of go through the configuration process and do, Alpha's built-in process and make it work once to get what goes into the table. So, okay, I'm losing track here. There's a JSON string that Alpha, using its own function, places into the table when you configure two-factor authentication for a user. And this is the syntax right here. So I did that once, went over and got the JSON and pulled it back to here to have part of my configuration. And so this string, which is JSON, gets pushed into the user record into Alpha's required field. And what's important here is, again, it says two-factor authentication requirement, true, method, email, and then email address, which is the user ID that they use to log in. And if you're not a programmer with Alpha, you might not know this piece of it, but so the user ID is configured here. The user ID is context, security, current user. That's the login, the email address that was used to log in. I have, so user ID, and I have user ID between curly brackets here, curly brackets. Below here, I then do evaluate string, and then the string and MFA code. And what that does is it replaces everywhere you have curly brackets variable with the value. So I end up with the actual user ID right here, not this curly bracket thing. And that's how I'm able to then push it into the table using SQL. Here's that other option, JSON requirement. And then in my particular application, all of my applications have a message.a5w page, and that's where you send the user once they've done something and you want to say thank you, or you want to say here's what happens next, or whatever. So I send it to message a5w with some information, and here it says that if they configure two-factor authentication, it says thank you for accepting it, please log in. If they didn't, if they said denied it, they said you can't log in. So that's just my message to the user. That's accept. Okay, and these are just small details. I won't even go through them, but my user list in the configuration is a old-fashioned grid, created probably 15 years ago, except that I've of course added the MFA stuff to it just now. So these are all part of my original framework that I built almost 15 years ago to build all of my applications on top of, so they all have the same similar system structure. And in my system configuration screen that you saw, it has, MFA is active or not active. I mentioned that already. So there's one alpha page besides the login page, that MFA Accept. You saw that where it asks to accept or deny. I went through all this already. I've gone through my entire presentation now, I think.
Well, we do have other questions, so.
I'm sorry.
That's great. No, it's fabulous.
Okay, go ahead.
We got some good questions, but everybody's really appreciative. A lot of nicely done.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, thank you.
And I agree. Let's see here. One of these, does the security system allow for incremental timeouts after X number of failed attempts?
Yes.
Okay.
It's not something I showed. It's just part of Alpha's basic. I could show it, but it's just an Alpha web security framework. It's one of the options on the login options tab, and you can tell it to fail or require them to say it. It allows you to kick them out or not let them log in again for X number of minutes, and you configure the minutes. And it actually, the configuration options for allowing them to disallow them back in can be set to years. So
yeah.
Anyway, yes, it has that.
All right, and I've been saving one that's a little trickier and speaks to slightly, same related topic, but in a different context. And that is, if one was operating on an older version of Alpha server that uses an older method of redirecting security DBF files via active links to MySQL, that method doesn't really support many of the newer functions that you're demonstrating today, including 2FA. Do you have any advice on how to migrate to new security methods from the old active link methods?
So are we using a current version of Alpha, but using the old method of DBFs and active link tables? Because there's current functions in Alpha that would be applicable. I don't, it's been years since I've done that, so I don't know. But there's currently applicable functions such as Two Factor Authentication function and configuration. Let me just think, would it apply? Let's ask the audience. Maybe somebody else knows the answer to that, because because I don't know. I haven't used active link tables, but active link tables mimic SQL while using the DBF tables.
Okay.
So you can write SQL code. So I think it would work, but I don't know.
Okay. Well, I would also say that question could be referred to guides@alphasoftware.com, and we do our best to answer it for you in a way that solves those problems. I certainly do not have the expertise to speak to that, but that would definitely be put into the hands of someone who did. All right. I'm looking here for other questions. If you do have any other questions, please submit them to the GoToWebinar.
Am I required to go the full hour?
No, no, you're not required to do anything. We'd love to fill the time with more questions and answers. It's a good time. Steve is an expert with knowledge on a great many things having to do with Alpha. So he might be able to field some other questions. I don't know if you're up for attempting to. That aren't related to 2FA, but that are related to Alpha.
While they're thinking about that, let me slip in a promo.
Oh
So
yeah, sure.
if you go to IADN.com, and I'm sure most of you already know this, but if you don't and you're not a member of that, just go join. It's free, and then you'll be on a mailing list for our webinars. And in our webinars, we always kind of go back and forth with what happens at these webinars on Wednesdays. I know that many times we do topics that happened here, and then sometimes you do topics that happened there. So it goes back and forth, and it's they're free. The webinars every Friday at noon Eastern time, so 1 hour before this one. And you'll find if you go there, past webinar videos, so all the videos from previous webinars, in many cases it requires a subscription, but in many cases they're free, and all the upcoming events and those kinds of things. So I just encourage, if you're an alpha enthusiast and you want another resource that fully supports alphasoftware.com. I mean, it's called Independent Application Developers Network, but it's 99% alpha developers, so you'll feel very much at home. And with that, I'll take it off the screen and go back to your questions.
Great, great. We had one request to discuss your web template, and then also one asking about how you put in your different background images.
Oh God, yeah. So I'll get to the second question first.
Okay.
I need to take a momentary break. There's someone at my front door. My wife's upstairs. I'm trying to make sure they don't make any noise, but I have to make sure they answer the door because otherwise they're going to start banging on the door. So I'll
No
be right
problem.
back. Just a second.
I'll take that moment to speak to y'all and say thank you for joining us. I would also love to remind you to check out our Alpha Software YouTube channel. That we've got a lot of great content there that you can go check out. Uh, let's see here. What we'll do is I will share links to everything. If Steve has any particular files to share, as well as links to um, any thing that we've discussed, I will make sure that we include those in our YouTube channel post, which you can find us at Alpha-Software on YouTube.
I'm back. The story about the noise is that I have a 17-year-old son who just learned how to drive our car really, really fast, burned up the engine, didn't throw a rod yet, but now that someone's outside about to tow the car.
Oh no.
That's my story. The question was not the template, but the background images, which I kind of stole that from somebody else years ago, and I hope he's not here, but let's see. If you come to any of the pages that are showed, like the index page, the home page. So at the very top is just a string of XBasic, where it looks up to a table called, I do everything through tables. You'll hardly find me hard coding anything. Even all the content on all of my websites are all based upon tables and HTML editor screens. Anyway, select everything from an image, a page images table, where the image is active and the page name equals, I don't know what that means, page name equals index. Oh, I'm sorry. So I have a field that says, where should this image show? Because I might have a home page, which is called index right there. And I might have a different page where I want different images to show, so it does that. Then here's the magic: order by rand, parentheses, which is MySQL or MariaDB language. It would be different for a SQL Server. And it means give them in a random order, and then execute that, etc. Image name equals image name from the table, which is going to be a JPEG or something like that. And this is the path, images / home for home page. And then somewhere down there, so this is image name, right? So somewhere down here, here it is. So now HTML text is style, cover page. So somewhere I have a style sheet called cover image that says that the image should be cover, which is CSS for wall to wall, top and bottom. Background, this is the URL. So I'm putting in CSS here.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So the style you're referencing there, covered underscore image, do you have an attached style sheet to the component, or what do you have there that's that you're referring that from?
I don't know. I can't remember. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm setting a style here. I'm setting the style, pardon me. I'm creating a class style,
Gotcha.
cover image. And now it fires that, so it executes that in the browser. And now I don't need to go back there, but if I go back to the component, like the login component, you will see as the background image that style, or the background, or the panel class probably. The panel class will be that one, and that's what causes the image to show up. In alpha, if you have, maybe I need to show this, I can't just talk about it. If you have a component that is based upon panels, panel login, panel navigator, panel card, etc. If it's based on components, then you can't put anything in the AFA-W page because it's all going to be obliterated by the component. The component, because it's a panel, goes wall to wall, top and bottom, side to side. So everything you do has to happen in the component, not in the web page. I mean, you may be used to putting things in the web page like show this image here. It's not going to work because the component takes over the entire page. So let me think here, navigator, panel login. There it is. So panel, body, class, name, cover, image. I created that in the A5W page, but I'm deploying it here in the component. I don't know if I had to do it that way, but that's the way I did it.
Excellent. And you had another question asking to discuss your web template.
Well, the web template is for sale, and it's on IADN. Let me find it here. I don't know if I didn't come here to sell it necessarily, but there's a bunch of things for sale. So here's the Alpha2Go. Alpha2Go is my other company. Alpha2Go is the consulting company for programming, and IADN is the network of developers like you guys. And so it's available for purchase there. And it was developed 12 something years ago, and it's been modified over time. And now the basic way it looks is hang on a second. The basic way it looks now is like this. So typical section, this section, this section, this section, and so on. That's the way it looks now. When it was originally built, it was made more like websites were built back in those days. So I've tried to keep up to date, but what it has in it, the important part of what it has in it is when you log in, I'm gonna go to here instead. You log in, it has this website admin. And this is the framework right here. And under there, we have a user list. So all the users are listed, ability to lock them out, invite them. Invite means send them an email saying, please click this link to register, all right? It has content areas. This is very important. There's nothing here. So a content area. So in my A5W page or on the component, I might have content ID equals, in this case, WT Accept MFA. And any content I type here, anything I include, images, whatever I put here, that will show up in that spot. So it's content management within the framework, rather than having to, I mean, your option if you don't have that is you have to open the page or whatever you're doing in alpha, modify it, and then publish it. I hate that. I always want my applications to be configured online. I never want the client to have to come back to me or their programmer and do it in alpha to send it up there for basic things, right? Email templates. So here's anytime an email goes out, it uses a template for mail merge and merges field names in with that. So it says, Dear John Smith, please click here and here's your password or something like that. Here's a mail merge field, full name. And then there's, it's not working right now. This is supposed to be an HTML editor window using CK editor. And then here is there's both the text version and the HTML version for emails. Text versions don't really apply like they used to, but they used to. And things like that. Basic configurations such as the name of the application, very important, the URL to the application. So any email it sends out, it uses the base URL plus whatever you ask it to put on. So it might say, click here, and it's going to have that as the base URL, and then whatever I configured it in xbasics / something else I've told it to do. Here's the version that shows up. It can be taken offline so that nobody can log in or get to it. It just has a page that says it's offline for maintenance. Contact info, system settings. I shouldn't go through all this right now. It's not part of the presentation, but it has various things for debug that are automatic, and branding. Branding is alpha to go is branding on your website. Omit login means it won't have a login button in the upper left, and so on. Other pieces of information that I don't use it often, but used to have the ability to have a different image on every single page, which was kind of the way people did it back then. Still could do that. And then my own SMTP information here, which I tend to use rather than the one that's in the Alpha project properties, where I can, because I might want to have different SMTP setups for different purposes, and the repository in Alpha only allows you to have one, whereas I might want to have multiple. That's most of it.
Okay. There was a question about whether this web template is UX driven, versus is it a grid or tab?
Yeah, it's out of date. So I'll be honest about that. It's out of date. It's a lot of grids, and if there was interest, I'd update the thing to UXs, because I have done that myself with an IADN for my purposes. But many of the things you saw me show you today are grids. They're function well, but they're not as WYSIWYG as you need them to be for mobile and so on. I'd have to update it. Yeah.
Okay. Fabulous. Let's see. If there's any other questions, please get them in this next few moments. But otherwise, I just want to say thank you, Steve. This has been wonderful. And I'll remind everybody, for other future questions, please send them in to us at guides@alphasoftware.com. Let's see if there's anything else coming in here. No, not too much. Anything else you would like to add, Steve?
No, I just thank you very much for the opportunity. I have not presented for quite a while. I shy away from that and let other people do it at IADN. IADN we try to be very interactive, so I try to push the audience to be the ones that present.
That's great. Thank you, Steve, so much for sharing with us this presentation on two-factor authentication and giving us a little more information about what you're doing over at IADN. Recommend to all of you to go check out IADN as well and get involved. Thank you, Steve, so much for coming. Thank you all for being here. I think that Sarah and Dave will be back with us next week. And I will be off. So you'll be back to the usual webinar as you know it. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. It's been wonderful to have you, Steve. We'll talk to you all. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Yep. And we'll hopefully see you next week. Thanks, guys.